Good afternoon, everybody. I am Shabir Safdar from the Partnership for Safe Medicines. I'm going to let Tony Rice kick us off here for a minute, and then we will begin. Tony, have you something to say?
Yes, thanks, Shabir. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to take a quick opportunity to thank you and welcome you to our virtual Wyoming Healthcare Access Network meeting. We usually try to do these live, but obviously the current condition we find ourselves in precludes us from doing that. I also just want to thank you for all of the work you all do as patient advocates, especially in the age of COVID-19. You should have previously received some information from me on the medicine assistance tool, and that is a great resource to share within your networks. And I know Shabir will touch on that here and some other resources in a little bit. So again, thank you for joining and welcome. And Shabir, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to mute you. A quick note about housekeeping. I hope you're using, if you're using the internet client, you can, not just because you can see my pretty face in the slides, but you can also, there's a button to raise your hand that allows you to say you want to stop and ask me a question. I'm absolutely happy to stop. There's only going to be a few of us on this call because the Wyoming community is not enormous, and we can stop the presentation for a minute, and you can ask your question. Also, just turn on all the microphones at the end in the same way, and you can ask any questions you might have then. So let me talk about what we're going to do today. So I'm going to cover a couple of things. I'm going to cover the scams that we've been seeing during the pandemic. This has been a tremendous moment of criminality for what people are proceeding to try and get away with and scamming a scared public, a really quite scared public. So I'm going to talk about those. We've been focusing nonstop on those healthcare related scams. I'm going to talk about the counterfeit medicine problem that we have today in America. We've actually had counterfeit medicine in America since before 2000. And it comes in waves, and different kinds of counterfeits are popular at different times. And so I'm going to talk about what's happening right now. And finally, I know this is a topic in the state this year in the legislature, and it's the topic in many legislatures this year, as well as at the federal level. I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of Canadian drug importation. What are states doing? What are the feds doing? Where does it stand? Can it work? And what's likely to happen next? And for what's happening next in Wyoming, I think I would rely on the expertise on this phone call, actually, more than I would opine. So let's talk about right now during the pandemic. What we have is this awful coincidence. We have a public who is panic buying because they've seen shortages of things like toilet paper and meat. And we've got a global counterfeit industry that's been going since before 2000 that can make perfect lookalikes of medication that are fake and have half, a quarter, or no dose of active pharmaceutical ingredient. We've also seen, obviously, counterfeit PPE as well, which is a really big issue. And we've got a lot of cultural pressure for people to both stay at home and surf the internet, as well as the cultural acclimation of people to buying things online, which is not something we had in as high a quantity before, but is really quite high now. And so what we've seen is really 5 main types of what I call COVID scams. We've seen counterfeit medical equipment, fake PPE, fake test kits, left and right. We've seen black market drug schemes where someone is selling something, but they're not a reliable or licensed channel representative. We've seen fake therapies, and we've seen those in scads. And quite often it's a fake therapy that was being sold before that is being resold as a COVID-19 cure. We've seen price gouging, of course, and we've seen financial crime. We've seen people trying to get you to pay them to send you a government form that you could download off the internet for yourself. So you send them or pay them $40 with your credit card, and then you get a PDF that you could have downloaded anyway for nothing. There's more advanced ones. There's people going door to door selling COVID-19 cleaning services. There are people in Ohio selling fake coronavirus health insurance. It's just it's really a bad time to be a consumer right now. We are seeing something now that we've seen for a long time, which is fake products, fake cures being marketed. The FDA has been on this for over 100 years. And so this is an actual tapeworm product that was sold that the FDA shut down many years ago, obviously designed to curb your appetite and make you skinnier. Obviously, nobody intentionally wants tapeworms. So that was one of the things that they shut down. More recently, we've seen people selling gold and silver in liquid form. Alex Jones from InfoWars actually has an InfoWars colloidal silver toothpaste, and these are designed. Obviously, they're marketed to cure the coronavirus. There's no medical evidence they do. Here's Alex's super blue silver that he sells, and it will literally stain your skin before it finally affects you in a negative health way if you have enough of it. So it's a pretty serious thing to make sure it doesn't stay on the market. You can actually see pictures of all or many of the fake products that the FDA has taken off the market online on their Flickr page at flickr.com. So if you're into that, that's actually pretty kind of a cool experience to check that out. One of the things that we are worried about at this time is people who have lost their economic security turning to unsafe channels to buy medicine to try and save money. So we are working very, very hard in all of our communications to make sure that people know about the medicine assistance tool, that they know about Needy Meds and RX Outreach if that's an appropriate fit for them, which is a mail order pharmacy that combines discounted medication and the mail order service. Needy Meds and Medicine Assistance Tool, though, are really my first step because I never want to break that connection between a patient and a pharmacist by pushing them to a mail order pharmacy. And the Needy Meds, actually, the website, it will let you look up the price of a medication with the Needy Meds card on their website. So that's very, very helpful. That's the most immediate thing that I think most people can do to help save money. And a lot of people are not used to being in the position of having difficulty saving money because they were well employed and now something has happened and they're not well employed. And so it takes time to sort of learn about these programs. So to the extent that you can help people, that's a really useful resource. We've tried to make it easier at PSM for people to communicate with their community and educate them. And we've put all of the advice about safety as well as these programs on our website in a one-page handout that you can download as a PDF and print out and hand out in English and Spanish. So you can actually educate people, and granted it is a lot of text, but it's a lot of really good advice. And it tells you where to find these different programs that you can go to that will help you. So if that would be a use to you, I highly encourage you to take a moment and look at it. Coming soon, we actually have a special set of resources coming out to address people that are concerned about medicine hoarding. And we'll have a video and a one-page handout and infographic and a blog post all about that. So let's talk really quickly about where we are with counterfeits in America today. We have, in 2000, we had a wholesale supply chain, an unregulated wholesale supply chain in Florida. That's basically the best way to put it. It was a number of people who decided that, look, I can be a wholesaler in Florida and the Board of Pharmacy will give me a wholesale license if I have $200, a fax machine, and I have no prior arrests. And so we got a lot of wholesalers in South Florida at that time, and they trafficked in a lot of fake and diluted medicine and made a lot of money and hurt a lot of people. 2001, we saw the start of Canadian online pharmacies, and they swept through and are still going strong today. There's 95% of the online pharmacies you might find if you start Googling online pharmacy are not safe for Americans. And the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy does that analysis every 6 to 12 months and finds the same number. We saw in 2008 a wave of counterfeit wholesale injectables, including oncology drugs, and that was a real problem. Lasted about 3 years. And then in 2015, the current wave of counterfeits started, which is counterfeit opioids made with fentanyl. The first counterfeits, the Procrits that we saw coming out of South Florida, were really good counterfeits 20 years ago. And this says a lot, because if 20 years ago they were making counterfeits that would have fooled most people, then they haven't gotten worse at their job now. In fact, it's gotten easier and cheaper to make these. And in this case, this was an example of counterfeit Procrit vials that were used and trafficked, and it was almost impossible for people to tell. It was only the missing degree sign on the label that would have really cued you in to the problem with these vials. And this actually went to court. A number of, whenever there's a counterfeit, someone always pulls everybody into court to talk about it, and the whole supply chain got pulled in. Manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor, pharmacy, not the pharmacist, that's the one person that escaped it, but the pharmacy itself got dragged into court and didn't get out of the court case at the beginning in a motion to dismiss or a summary judgment. They were headed to a trial because the judge wanted to evaluate whether not noticing the missing degree sign made you liable for distributing a counterfeit to a patient. And that's a terrifying thing, I think, for most healthcare professionals, that level of scrutiny could really get you in trouble, despite the fact that it's such an easy thing to miss. In 2001, we saw these Canadian entrepreneurs. Both of these guys ended up in trouble with the Department of Justice, but it took many years. And Andrew Strempler in particular fled to the Caribbean and was only caught when his flight made a refueling stop between the Caribbean and Canada in Miami, and the marshals took him there. In 2008, we had this counterfeit Avastin, which is marketed as Altuzan in Turkey. And it was distributed to hundreds of patients. No one knows how many people died because they were all cancer patients, and it's hard to prove that a cancer patient didn't die of cancer. But this is someone who, this woman, Betty Hunter, who was given this product and who passed away very soon after her treatment had started and did not get any better. And this is a map of all of the different clinics that the FDA warned that they figured out were doing business with these 5 criminal wholesale rings selling counterfeit injectables and black market injectables. And they were everywhere. They touched everywhere. It was really quite terrifying. In Wyoming, actually, there were 9 different medical clinics and practices that were warned. And the MO of these criminals was to sell directly whenever they could to doctors, and not doctors operating out of a hospital, but independent practicing physicians. And the reason is because their compliance procedures were worse than pretty much everybody else. So if you're a pharmacist, you know that the people that issue you your pharmacy license is the same person that issues the wholesale company their license as well. And so checking that license is not so hard. You know exactly what agency to go to. If you're an independent oncologist, the problem is the person who orders your medicine is probably also the person that orders your copier paper and lunch. And you don't have a pharmacy license. And it turned out that a number of these physicians and their business managers claimed ignorance that you even had to have a wholesale pharmacy license to sell pharmaceuticals in a wholesale manner. But there were orthopedics, OBGYNs, sports medicine clinics, an aesthetic clinic, and a couple general medical practices. And I didn't actually pull the legal documents to see, but the OBGYN, I'm guessing, was one of the folks that ordered non-sterile IUDs from the black market, which was a big thing in 2013 as well. Today, the counterfeit wave we're dealing with is counterfeit pills made with fentanyl. And increasingly now a little bit of meth, a little bit of people making Adderall with meth, but it's mostly opioids and Xanax made with fentanyl. As you can see from this photo, these are fatal doses of heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil. It is 1 grain of carfentanil to kill a man. It is a small pinch of grains of fentanyl to kill a human being, and it is a significantly more heroin to do the same thing. This is why so many people die from counterfeit medicines made with fentanyl, because the people making those counterfeit medicines are not doing so with industrial levels of quality control. And so 3 milligrams versus 2 is the difference between life and death for anyone who takes that pill. And we've seen cases like in Tennessee where this young man and his friends ordered Xanax off of the internet, and they got a bottle of Xanax pills, and they were all of inconsistent quality. And one man, it's almost like playing Russian roulette. One man got the pill with too much fentanyl in it, and the rest of them did not. And they all took them, and the one guy passed away, and the rest of them were left with the horror that that might have been them. As of January, we've seen these pills in 49 states from confirmed lab tests, and we've seen people killed in 38 of them as of January. As of now, it's 42, I believe. All right, so let's talk about importation. That's the last topic, and then we'll do some Q&A. So back in 2003, this idea came because people were concerned about the cost of medicine, and Canada had some price-controlled medicine they wanted access to. So Congress passed a law and said, before you can't import medicine from Canada if you follow a bunch of rules. These rules are: one, HHS has to study it and report to Congress on the safety of it. Then the Secretary of HHS has to certify to Congress that it will pose no additional risk. And three, that it will actually reduce costs for Americans. And then fourth, they need to issue regulations, federal regulations, so that people don't just start buying medicine from Canada, but they do it in a way that has been evaluated to be safe. So what happened was they did that report in 2003 and 2004. And in fact, current Secretary of HHS, Alex Azar, was on the report study committee. And they found, not surprisingly, that it wouldn't save that much money, and there was a real risk to patients. And then they skipped these next two steps. And then last November, they issued a draft regulation for the public to comment on, and that ended in March. And they closed the comments. We read those comments along with many other people. They ran 20 to 1 against, and not surprisingly, everybody associated with the healthcare profession weighed in against it, and Canadians actually weighed in against it. Now we've got about 24 states in the last year and a half that have introduced legislation to enable them to import medicine from Canada. We've got 5 states that have passed legislation that to actually implement it and are submitting a plan to HHS to do so, because that plan has to be approved by the Secretary of HHS. Colorado's actually submitted a plan, but if you read it, there's no details. I can't imagine that it might get approved. And that whole step for the moment is over. What happened during the comment period for those regulations is quite shocking. I mentioned before that it was 20 to 1 against. That was quite shocking. Every pharmacist organization in every province of Canada joined comments in the American rulemaking arguing against it. And that was quite horrifying. Wholesalers in Canada, pharmacies, distributors, manufacturers, they all weighed in against it. There were no Canadian comments in favor of it. And we saw manufacturers and distributors, hospital, retail, and community pharmacists in America all file comments against it. There were more than 25 different patient groups in Canada, and law enforcement in the US, sheriffs and others filed comments against it. No law enforcement in America filed comments in favor of it, I think partially because of the enormous difficulties of prosecuting perpetrators of counterfeit medicines, and lots of life science companies. So that was pretty shocking. The most shocking of all was actually that the government of Canada filed comments against it, which I've never seen before. I've never seen a federal government of another country file comments in a rulemaking in America. I'm sure it happens, but it was news to me and a lot of people that work on this. And they basically said, we're not big enough, we don't buy enough medicine, and you actually could exacerbate our already significant drug shortages. I just looked, if you look at the FDA's webpage, we have between 100 and 150 drugs that are being monitored, some in shortage, some shortages are resolved in America right now. Canada's drug shortage list is online. If you look at it, it is 2,000 drugs in shortage. So their problem is really big. And so the Canadian government was like, we are not having any of this. And this is going to be a problem for anybody who goes forward. What's next is that HHS could withdraw those regulations or revise them or just approve them and say, go start submitting your plans. More states will probably submit their plans to buy drugs from Canada. It would be foolish and dangerous for them to approve them, but I suspect it might happen anyway. And Florida and Colorado have actually appropriated between them about $11 million to develop plans and try and set up their own mini version of the FDA to do this importation. I don't think it's going to work, but they're going to try it anyway. And I think a lot of people will get hurt in the process, especially in Florida, where these are targeted for the poorest members of the public in Florida, for the Medicaid program, for people in the prisons. They're the least able to recover from some kind of crisis, and they're being used as guinea pigs, really. So the state can save money on their medication costs. Canada, by the way, has been very clear that they're going to not tolerate this, and they are going to enact export controls on pharmaceuticals. So this idea, even if it starts to go forward, is going to go bad pretty fast. And my guess is what's going to happen is some state will end up buying from a sketchily licensed or an unlicensed Canadian wholesaler and end up with counterfeit medicines. And hopefully we find out about it and we can reach the patients to tell them. That is my prepared slides. There's a lot of material on our website and our social media at Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter if you want to follow us. But I'm going to go ahead and take a moment now to unmute the microphones. And if anybody has a question, you're welcome to ask it. If you don't want to ask a question, you can certainly put yourself back on mute. But there's just a few of us here. I wanted to make sure that you could ask a question if you can enunciate it. So tell me, I'm happy to answer a question if you have one.
Hey, Shabir, this Pharmacy Association.
Hello, Craig.
Thanks for the presentation. It's about the importation and about the bill really passed. I was just curious if you could give me your thoughts. I kind of know them, but it's going to be a plan that the legislature that the Department of Health will do this study, which I think you know that, but I just want to get your thoughts on that with others.
So I'll tell you what I've seen happen in other states. And this is where I think it's really important that we speak up, that people who are involved in patient care speak up. Because what I've seen in other states, in Maine, and Colorado, and Florida, and Vermont, is they develop a plan. And when you ask them hard questions, like this system seems to break track and trace, how are you going to address that? Or how much money have you actually calculated for doing testing? Or how have you resolved the problem of finding vendors when Canada and Canada's regulatory authorities have said they don't want their vendors participating? States who have proceeded have glossed over these details, and these details put patients at risk if you don't work them out right. And so I think that they're likely to do the same playbook where they try and put together a plan, and when there's a hard question, they just dance around it. But you don't dance around safety. Like when you break track and trace, and you no longer can trace a medicine back to the manufacturing floor, that's not a question to be kicked down the road. That's a question that you have to answer now or stop. And my hope is that there will be some common sense that prevails as that plan is being developed, and the report, the legislator comes up with says, these are deal breaker problems, and this should not proceed until something changes in the system that they can be resolved. And if they actually come out with a plan that they think can go forward, but they don't address those concerns, I think you've got a real safety problem, like several other states have right now, if you try and implement it. Well, I'm going to go ahead, and after we terminate this, I'm going to go ahead and make a recording of what happened today, and I will send it out in a follow-up email tomorrow. If you found this useful, I would love it if you would share it with your colleagues. It'd be very, very helpful. And if they missed it or they had something else to do, I totally understand. And I will also have my email in there. And so if you have follow-up questions you want to ask in private, I'm happy to answer them. Everybody, please stay safe. This is a very weird time we're living through. and I appreciate you spending some time with me today. It was great. Thank you, and have a nice day.